Perhaps you could sort of tell us about what the creative wellspring was. Why do Drood at this moment in time?
When Gwyn mentioned it to me and said she was really passionate to do it, I hadn't read it. I was dimly aware of it, but I'm a sucker for anything with mystery in the title.
Right.
So I scurried off to the bookshop, bought it, and devoured it practically at one sitting, and I just thought it was so exciting. It felt like Dickens was trying something new. I mean, it's faster paced. It reads like a thriller whodunit. And it was designed to be much shorter than most of his novels. I think it was only meant to be 20-odd installments, and he died in the middle of chapter 12. So it felt like he was experimenting with a new sort of form, a new way of telling a story, and I just became completely intrigued by it. And it's got an anti-hero at its heart, which again, a very different character from anything I'd ever seen before in Dickens. And the thing about a mystery is everybody wants to know how it ends.
And you've done that, but we're not going to tell you.
No, we're not.
Completely not.
So, and from your perspective then?
It's not a challenge you could turn up. I mean, you've got half a novel. You know, my wife calls me the man who's finished off Dickens, which I think is unfair. but
and not for the first time.
Not for the first time, no. And, you think, it's not possible to walk past and offered to do that. But, you think, well, when you read the book, you think there are some very obvious things there. There are some very strong pillars of what he set in the narrative. That should be a doddle. And then you try, and it really is difficult.
One of the things I'm intrigued about, because the tone of the book is quite difficult in that sense, because it is, it's got effectively an opium addict kind of sexual stalking murderer in it. In the sleepy town, in the sleepy town of Cloisterham, aka Rochester, the kind of nearby town to where Dickens spent his last years writing, and that kind of contrast between opium dens of London and the sleepy town is very pronounced. And I just wondered, in terms of how you approached it in terms of the tone, because it is quite a different, and I think you've done a brilliant job in getting that tone right, but it's.
I think you have to accept it's a melodrama. He loved melodrama, and there's nothing wrong with bringing out a melodrama. But his talent, the same way as his genius, the same way, not talent, his genius, like Shakespeare, is there is modernity in the writing as well. And what could be more modern than drugs and stalking? We've got a character here. You would never have used the word stalking, but every woman, when you see the second half, when you get to the fairly famous scene in the Sundial Garden, where he ends by saying, "I love you more than any man has ever loved a woman. I will pursue you to the death." This should send a shudder through any woman in 2011. So the modernity is there at the same time as melodrama. It makes it extraordinary. And Lisa Osborne, our wonderful producer who is here, who's the other wellspring of all the ideas we brought together, she's out there somewhere, talk very strongly about the Ezekiel quote about the man who turneth away from the wicked man turneth from his wickedness and does what's right. We very much wanted to bring out the idea too, tonally, that this is a man whose soul does hover between the dark and the light. He is rescuable at the beginning. He finds inspiration in his music. He finds the divine. He finds things to aspire to in the music. But ultimately, he is irredeemable.
It is interesting in this novel, perhaps more than others, that there is that sense in which there's a whole play on kind of morale. I mean, obviously the cathedral setting, and the fact that so much of the film is within that environment, either exterior or interior in the environment, and there's an awful lot of discussion about morality, right and wrong, people turning from the light, which again is unusual for Dickens. There's a quite simple Christianity in most of his books, which is this seems to be kind of dealing in very complicated relationships and moral grey areas.
It is, but he does what he often does, and I'm sure Rory will expand on this in a moment. Dickens always presents you with a couple of characters you can have faith in, and Grewgious is one of them, and Crisparkle, which must be a combination of Christian Sparkle or something that came into his Thackerayan bit of it. Have I just stolen your line? Sorry.
I was playing up the crisps.
And, so he always does that thing that he gives you a couple. On the page he does it, and he does it on film very well. A couple of people you can have complete moral trust in, and those two are theirs. And so you kind of have these pillars of ethics and morality that you can play with the dark and the light around.
apart from you providing that additional kind of moral fibre, is that you've also got all that lovely comedy with your mother and the other characters to provide a kind of antidote to the darkness of the...
Yeah, well, I mean, that I think is why people always enjoy reading Dickens, is there's the full panoply of life there. Light and dark and humour and sadness. And I guess, I mean, in the second episode, there's slightly more sadness for Septimus at points, but yeah, people aren't necessarily stock characters, albeit they're sometimes given stock names. And Septimus, yes, is someone who seeks for the best in people, is desperate to see in Neville a goodness that everybody else seems to deny. But at the same time, he wrestles with his conscience and wrestles with his innate optimism.
And we'll come back to Neville because I want to talk about him in a minute. But I want to bring Freddie in because it's, you know, you're the mystery that this ends up revolving around, and you've just met your demise in the first episode. But what was it like for you? Because I think that actually Drood is a more unusually complex young man than you often find in Dickens, and actually the switch which you see in the episode from him being this kind of very optimistic, his life's all sorted, and then everything then comes crashing down in one conversation inside the cathedral where he thinks he's going to get married and suddenly isn't. The whole change is really interesting. I just wondered if you could talk about how you approached your character in this.
Yeah, it's quite tricky, and it was quite tricky in that way, because he does sort of ebb and flow and peak and trough an awful lot, even after having been crushed by, he's been told he's not going to be marrying the woman he expected. He eventually finds the joy in that it is the right thing to do, and then thinks he's been betrayed, and it's all been going on behind his back, and his uncle's been dabbling with his missus. It's like this, and that's quite, it's a difficult thing to approach initially as an actor, because traditionally, I mean, you want to find an arc, you know, he starts like this, he does this, and then he ends like this, and that doesn't happen at all. It does this all the way. So it was tricky. I just had to, you have to find bits about him that are likable, bits that are dislikable. I read a very good piece in the introduction of the novel, I don't know who it was by, I think actually maybe Bernard Shaw actually, saying that at a distance he's a charmer and he's he's the girl's dream, I suppose, and then when he gets close, you get close to him, he's quite difficult to like. He's quite difficult to like, and so I had to play around with that.
You brought that up very strongly.
Thanks.
Yeah, I
Or the charmer, good luck.
And you both have a very interesting relationship with Neville, who I think is a fascinating character. And actually, what you've done with the Landlesses, again, a bit of a clue there in the names, about what Dickens was thinking, is that you've emphasised, and the script emphasises, but you've done it in terms of the drama, you've emphasised that, in a sense, the colonial relationship, which is only really, at best, hinted at in the... I mean, you're not even quite sure whether they're of Asian descent in the novel. And I think, which also makes, again, I would say that the drama more contemporary. And I just wondered if you could talk about their characters a little bit.
Oh, do you want to feel that? Or? They are a mystery, as there are many mysteries to the Mystery of Edwin Drood. 2 Asian characters come in, our lovely actors who played them were so made up to be cast, and the only 2 Asian roles available in the whole of Dickens. Can't believe how pleased they were when they got them. And these 2 people come. They are in the novel. They are an example of Dickens tilting at colonial charity and a whole kind of pompous thing about look how good we are being to these poor folk from across. But they're wonderful. You know, you don't need notes. You've got these hints that we've brought out as much as we can. You've got 2 characters. twins. One of them used to cut her hair off. The girl used to cut her hair off in the novel and pretend to be a boy to escape. And they're called the Landlesses. Is there a plan? Clearly there's a plan. Do we know what it was? No. We've no idea, so we have to make it up. And so we did. But, again, the modernity comes out. Here is a man writing for a popular audience who presumably had as many prejudices as we have, well, many more, perhaps, than we have by now, I would hope, but who actually talk about things taking a dark hue. And, the wonderful exchange that you saw tonight saying, is it because we're strangers? Well, actually, yes, probably. Yes, which could have been written at any time. So they're just a magical kind of thing to dangle in front of him. You wonder where he was going.
I think that was one of the boldest decisions that Gwyn made, was to make them Asian characters, because there is no absolute textual evidence.
No.
Is there? And she did say to me once that she studied the illustration for the book cover incredibly carefully. In fact, as we all did at one point, searching desperately for clues as to how Dickens meant to end the story. And the Landlesses are featured there, and she looked really, really carefully, and they're sort of cross-hatching on the faces. And she thought, well, is that a deep Tam, or could that be that they're half Tamil? And she decided to make them half Tamil. And I thought that was, I remember when we got the first draft of the first script, and these two Asian twins stepped out of the omnibus, I thought, wow, that's exciting.